This is an example of balance of payment. Let's assume that we have the following transaction. Australians import iPhones of amount 100 million Australian dollars from United States. Therefore, this is considered international transaction. Therefore, I will report it under my balance of payment. Here we have two countries. We have Australia and we have United States. Therefore, I can show you what will happen to the Australian balance of payment and what will happen to the United States balance of payment. Let's start with Australian balance of payment. We know that we have two accounts, current account and capital account. Therefore, Australians import iPhones of amount 100 million. Import is considered one-way transaction or two-way transaction? It's one-way transaction. Why? Because we're not going to export these iPhones again to United States in the future. Therefore, since it's one-way transaction, it will be reported under our current account. Then I'd like to know what will be the sign of this transaction. Would it be positive or negative? Do we receive the cash or we pay the cash? If Australians import iPhones, it means that they will get iPhones, they will pay the money. If they will pay the money, it's cash outflow, it's a negative cash flow. So this means that under current account, I will put negative 100 million. Then let's think from the American perspective. The United States balance of payment. We have two accounts, current account and capital account. We know that from US, they will export the iPhones. Therefore, from US perspective, exports are considered one-way transaction. Therefore, it will be reported under current account and US will receive the money. So if they will receive the money, it means that it's a positive cash flow. It is inflow. Therefore, I will put positive 100 million under current account. So this means that with every transaction, it will be reported under the same account in two countries, because remember, balance of payments is about international transaction, so it's a transaction between countries. Therefore, each transaction will be reported under the same account for two countries, but it will be of a different sign. Why different sign? Because one country will receive the cash, another country will pay the cash. Therefore, this transaction was reported under current account for both Australia and United States, but different sign. It's a negative for Australia, it's positive for United States. Let me give you another detailed example, but now we will focus on Australia only. Why? Because Australia deals with many other countries, so I'm not going to make a balance of payment for all these countries. I'd like just to focus on one country, which is Australia. Therefore, we will give you different transactions and I would like you to record each transaction for Australia's balance of payment. So here we emphasize it's Australia's balance of payment and I will give you a transaction and all transactions will be in million Australian dollars. I don't need to write million Australian dollars and it will be here current account and our capital account. Our first transaction, the imports of BMWs of amount 200 million Australian dollar. So remember, imports is one way or two way. It's one way because we're not going to export these BMWs in the future. Since it's one way, I will put it under current account. Here, imports, we will get the BMW, we will pay the money, so it will be negative. So right here, negative 200 under current account. The second transaction, the exports of machinery to Singapore of amount 100 million Australian dollar. Therefore, we're going to export equipments and machinery. Therefore, exports is one way or two way. It's one-way transaction. Why? Because we're not going to import these machines in the future. If it's one way, I will report it under current account. Once we export, we receive the cash or we pay the cash? We receive the cash. Once we receive the cash, therefore, I will write it as 100 under current account. Another transaction. The spending by Spanish tourists in Australia of amount 30 million Australian dollars. So we have some Spanish tourists in Australia. Therefore, this is one way or two ways? This is one way. Why? Because this is an example of export of services. So our services could be such as tourism or education. Therefore, tourists will give Australia the money. Therefore, for Australia, it will be inflow. Therefore, I will write plus 30 under current account. Another transaction. The purchase of Australian treasury bills of amount 140 by French residents. So French residents will buy bonds issued by Australian government by amount of 140. Once they buy the bonds, one day they will sell the bonds and get their money back. Therefore, it's two-way transaction. Consequently, it will be recorded under capital account. So if French will buy treasury bonds, it means that Australia will receive the money. Therefore, I will write plus 140 under capital account. Another transaction. The treatment of Australian patients in Germany of amount 20. So I know that some Australians will seek some medical treatment in Germany. Therefore, this is an example of what? Import of services. It's one way or two ways. It's one way. Not because Australians has a treatment in Germany, this means that Germans will come and have a similar treatment in Australia. So it's one-way transaction. This is an import of services. So if Australians will have a treatment in Germany, it means that Australians will pay the money. So it will be negative. So I will write negative 20 under current account. Next transaction. The purchase of souvenirs in Italy by Australian tourists of amount 10. So Australians, they traveled to Italy and they started to purchase some souvenirs, some presents, some gifts of amount 10. So this one way or two ways? It's one way. Since it's one way, I will report it under current account. Australia will pay, so it will be negative. So write negative 10 under current account. Another transaction. Australia gives international loan to Greece of amount 110. If Australia will give a loan, it means that one day Australia will get the loan back. So it's two-way transaction. Consequently, we will report it under capital account. Australia gives international loan, so this means that Australia will pay the money, therefore it will be negative. Therefore, I will write negative 10 under capital account. Next transaction. The purchase of German shares by Australian citizens of amount 130. So Australians would like to buy some German shares in Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Therefore, once Australians buy the shares, one day in the future they will sell the shares. Therefore, it's a two-way transaction. It will be reported under capital account. Here, Australians will buy the shares. It means that Australians will pay the money. Therefore, it will be cash outflow. It will be a negative cash flow. Therefore, we will write negative 130 under capital account. Next transaction. The foreign direct investment of Chinese firms in Australia of amount 180. So Chinese firms would like to come and invest in Australia. Therefore, once they make an investment, one day they will sell their project and get their money back. Therefore, it's two-way transaction. It will be reported under capital account. Chinese firms will invest in Australia, so Australia will receive the money. So it will be cash inflow. It will be a positive cash flow. So we will write plus 180 under capital account. So after we report all our transactions, we need to get our total, our net. Therefore, let's get the net or the total. For current account, let's get the summation. Negative 200 plus 100 plus 30 minus 20 minus 10. It will give us negative 100. So this means that we have a deficit, current account deficit. Why? Because at the end, once we get the net effect, we have more cash outflow compared to the cash inflow under current account. And that's why it's a negative, it's a deficit. Then for capital account, let's do the same. Let's get the sum. 140 minus 110 minus 130 plus 180. It will give us a total or a net of 80. So what do I mean by 80? It means that we have a capital account surplus. What do I mean by capital account surplus? It means that under capital account, we have more cash inflow compared to the cash outflow. Therefore, once we have our current account and capital account, would like to know what would be the impact on the reserve. Therefore, I need to get the sum of the current account and capital account to measure the change in the reserve. Will our reserve will be higher or will be lower? Therefore, I would say that our change in reserve is negative 100 plus 80. I know that negative 100 plus 80 is equal to negative 20. What do you mean by negative 20? Overall, after all transactions in both current account and capital account, we have more cash outflow compared to the cash inflow of negative $20 billion or $1 million in our example here. Remember, it could be any unit, million, billion, whatever the unit you use in the question. Therefore, with this negative 20, from where we will base this additional 20? It's from the country's reserve. Therefore, we know that our reserve will be lower. If reserve will be lower, what will happen to the value of our currency? The value of our currency will be lower. Consequently, it would result in currency depreciation. In this example, it's for Australia, so I know that Australian dollar will depreciate.